Wolfe was convinced that the failure to defeat the French was his responsibility, and his officers agreed. One wrote, "General Wolfe's health is very bad. His generalship is, in my opinion, not a bit better." They were frustrated with Wolfe's obsession with attacking the well-defended Beauport shore. They thought they had a better idea. They wanted to attack Quebec from the other side, here on the Plains of Abraham at the top of the steep cliffs. But landing troops here would mean getting their ships past the French defences. No easy task. In order for the British ships to get past the Narrows here and past the gun batteries in Quebec, they had to wait for the sun to go down, and the tide had to be perfect, had to be steaming in at full speed, and the wind had to be from blowing over my shoulder. Everything had to be exactly right. That meant the ships could get up some speed and shoot the Narrows before the French had time really to unleash their cannon batteries in full force on them. Thanks to the skill and bravery of the British sailors, the Navy succeeded in getting a large number of ships through the Narrows with only minor damage from the French guns. Wolfe finally recovered and took command. By now, winter was fast approaching, so he reluctantly went along with his officers' plan. He ordered his troops to get ready for one last attack. Once again, it would be an amphibious assault. It would need the perfect integration of the army and navy, and this time they would attempt to land in a secret night attack. Their landing point was by a ravine where a rough track led up the cliffs, called the Anse au Foulon. In the early hours of September the 13th, 1759, Wolfe's first wave landed here, quite near the Anse au Foulon. Conditions were as they are tonight, still and clear, the perfect conditions for amphibious landing. The landing spot today is a working port, a reminder that history can be found in industrial parks, not just national parks. Well, this is certainly one obstruction that the British troops didn't have to put up with. The Anse au Foulon is just over there. They've built a modern road up the ravine where the old track used to be. But we're told that the first wave of Wolfe's army actually landed a little bit further downstream, somewhere around about here, and they were forced to climb up a section of cliff without any track up it at all. So these British troops knew they had to get to the top to clear away the French defenders so the rest of the British force could land. Everything depended on these guys getting up this slope as quickly as possible. It's actually brilliant, this, because it tallies with the accounts written on the day itself, which says they were grabbing onto roots and bushes and they went up, and actually there's nothing else here at all to hold on to. This soil is particularly difficult to get a grip on. It just comes away under your feet. You can see why this climb became one of the legends of British military history. Schoolboys into the 20th century were taught about this, and they came to symbolise everything that the British liked to think of themselves as. It was brave soldiers overcoming the odds against nature, against their enemy, toughing it out to achieve final victory. They arrived here at the top and found themselves near the top of the track which led up from the Anse au Foulon, where this modern road now runs. Fortunately, they'd ended up just behind a French camp that was guarding the track. The soldiers there were taken completely by surprise. The French now had no stomach for that fight, and they fled. The road from Anse au Foulon to the heights of Abraham now lay open. The British now readied themselves. This was what they'd been waiting for, a chance to put all their training into action on the open field of battle. But as they reached this point here, approximately about half a mile away from the walls of Quebec, they saw the French army streaming out of the gates. One British soldier said they were like bees coming out of a hive. This is approximately where the British line would have been, starting down there next to the cliffs by the river and then stretching in a long line this way for about half a mile, about 3 feet between each of the soldiers. And usually the British army had lined up 3 deep, but some young officers like Wolfe insisted that 2 ranks would be enough. So really this period sees the birth of what we now call the Thin Red Line. In the front rank were the tallest men. One drill manual says, the most well-made men, to intimidate the enemy as they charged towards them. They were told to stand bolt upright, chests out, eyes forward, and in dead silence, waiting for the commands of their officers and waiting for the enemy. Meanwhile, the French had formed up a rough and ready line over there, but whereas the British stood still, waiting, the French couldn't wait, and they charged. Now, it wasn't an orderly advance. There was some confusion. There was shouting and running. There were calls of "Vive la roi," which is "Long live the king." And they sort of hurtled towards the British line. Now, the British unleashed their first deadly weapon. The British cannon switched to firing what they called canister, which are boxes with 400 musket balls in that explode when they come out of the cannon and turn them into some giant shotguns, and these cut down swathes of French. The French firing was pretty wild anyway because they were running along and firing as they went, so most of their shots were missing. As the French charged towards them, the British stood still and ready. This was the moment that these British troops lined up in their ranks had been training for, not just for the summer, but for their entire careers. Hour upon hour of musket drills. When the French were 50 or 60 metres out, the command came to present, and 1,000 muskets were raised and pointed at the enemy. They aimed typically for the French ankles, knowing that the muskets tended to fire high. Then, when the French were 40 metres away, when the officers could see the whites of their eyes, came the command, fire. The effect of that musket volley was shattering. Many of the British muskets were loaded with 2 balls, and as a result, thousands of musket balls travelling at 500 feet per second crashed into the French ranks. French charge came to a halt. Many of their officers and their leaders were wiped out. Then, just 20 seconds later, the British had reloaded and fired another volley, and then again and again. For 5 or 6 minutes, the French stood in utter confusion, their sight completely obscured by huge clouds of musket smoke, the noise of the volleys deafening them. The smell of all the gunpowder was apparently nauseous. The French officers that remained said they'd never experienced anything like it. Sure enough, the French couldn't withstand the British musket fire. They turned and fled, leaving behind them hundreds of dead and wounded comrades. Britain had its victory. Months of preparation, a journey of 1,000 miles, and a summer of stalemate had climaxed in a battle lasting less than half an hour.